As a follow-up to a video I did yesterday about Alex Kurtzman's renewal over the Star Trek franchise at Paramount, Viacom, CBS, I wanted to go into another article today that deals a little bit more with some of the inner workings of Hollywood studios and situations like this and how I think they relate. We need to put some things into perspective, not only about Marvel Entertainment, Scarlett Johansson, Star Trek, but also about Star Wars and Lucasfilm, because we're getting more and more hints about things that we may see coming up later in this year, and I think some people out there may be misconstruing some things, so let's talk about it right now. Renegade Online. So the other day we got a follow-on article from the Wrap following up some of the information from Business Insider, Scarlett Johansson and Disney's inner workings, what's going on with this lawsuit that ScarJo has filed. And I think there's some more information in here that kind of just gave me a few thoughts on some things that I want to share with you. So please make sure you watch this video all the way to the end, because we are going to make some connections at that point that I think are extremely valuable and worth discussing at the very least. And I do hope that you leave a comment below. Please hit that like button, share it out, make sure you're subscribed, and make sure you've got the notification bell punched so you can get all these videos as soon as they pop out so you don't miss any news and updates. And thank you so much for being here. The channel has been growing thanks to you guys. But again, keep those comments coming below these videos because YouTube algorithms absolutely adore that. So let's get right into it. So this is an article from The Wrap, Scarlett Johansson's lawsuit and the Disney brand, quote, carnage. Is CEO Bob Chapek to blame? And of course, we discussed a little bit about this in 2 or 3 videos ago when the lawsuit first dropped about internal strife or disagreements at the very least between the directions of Bob Iger and Bob Chapek. This article fleshes this out a little bit more. So I want to kind of skip through some of this because it is a little bit lengthy. We don't need to go through everything. A lot of this is information that we've already covered. I just want to kind of hit the high points of some of the new information or information that I have, let's say, reconsidered a little bit, because I think there's some underlying messages here that we can tie to other things like Lucasfilm, and then perhaps make a comparison between where Star Trek is now and where Star Wars was just a few years ago. And I think this is key to understand if we're going to ever see the Star Trek franchise be reinvigorated. So basically, Iger and Chapek come from 2 very different backgrounds. Bob Iger comes from the Hollywood studio production side, and Bob Chapek comes from the parks and resorts side, who has very little interaction and connection with the Hollywood types. And part of that is what's playing into this whole issue with Scarlett Johansson right now, that, you know, they're suggesting, well, he doesn't really understand how the town works. And that's not necessarily a bad thing for Chapek. That's not necessarily a bad thing for fans if we look at it through the lens that Chapek is just in this to make money. Now, that doesn't assuage the fact that he may have made, or Disney may have made, a violation of Scarlett Johansson's contract when it came to using the day-and-date release strategy on Disney Plus for Black Widow, as they recently did in tandem with theaters. But again, we discussed that in a previous video. I want to look at some other parts of this. The feeling was that Disney's last CEO, Bob Iger, would have handled this differently, was all the more pronounced by Disney's official response to the lawsuit, which I didn't care for, bringing in the pandemic into it, saying that ScarJo's response was callous based on this. I thought this was just a lot of bunk. She disclosed her $20 million salary for the movie, suggesting she was being greedy in claiming the $50 million in box office based back in compensation, so on and so forth. And we go down here. It seems that Chapek is putting a lot of his industry and talent relations in the hands of his distribution group. Distribution is not really the same thing as production. Those are different channels, and that's key to understand, which has proven to be inexperienced in the traditional ways that things are to be done in Hollywood. One entertainment executive told The Wrap, that wouldn't have happened under former CEO Bob Iger. He would have done it himself. Quote, Disney's approach under Iger would have been markedly different and would have had less initial brand carnage, Eric Scheifer of the Patriarch organization and chairman of the Reputation Management Consultants said. Iger's team, quote, would have attempted to work behind the scenes and maintain a greater level of trust in the relationship. Gene Del Vecchio, an adjunct professor of marketing at USC's Marshall School of Business, agreed that this situation called for some of Iger's signature diplomacy. Quote, Iger was named CEO in 2005, not only due to his business acumen, but for his mastery of developing and keeping relationships that he had honed for dozens of years, working with the temperamental, high-profile stars, Del Vecchio told the Wrap. Quote, Disney's acquisition and management of Pixar and Lucas are testimony to his ability. Chapek's previous experience with Disney consumer products, parks, and resorts did not demand the same level of star-charged interaction. Now, again, like we just said, they come from two very different backgrounds, and this has been part of the alleged strife and consternation behind the scenes of the Iger to Chapek transition, two very different mindsets. Now, this is a section right here that I think is key, and we have to focus in on this because there's some information here that not only gives us a good amount of backstory for many of us like myself who had kind of forgotten this part of the story, this part of the corporate story with Marvel and Disney, but also puts into perspective some things about Lucasfilm, which have been discussed not only here on this channel, but also by friends like Doomcock and Midnight's Edge. And this lends a lot of credence to what has been quote-unquote rumored to have happened in the last year or two. Let's look at this. Feige, largely considered to be the architect of Marvel's successful multi-franchise film operation, previously answered to Marvel Entertainment CEO Ike Pearlmutter. Tensions arose between Feige and Pearlmutter during the early phases of the MCU because of Pearlmutter's reported frugality and micromanaging style. In 2015, when Feige threatened to leave Marvel, when Pearlmutter bought into slash the budget for Captain America Civil War, Iger intervened and approved a reorganization that had Feige reporting directly to Walt Disney Studios chairman Alan Horn. Now let's stop right there. Let's talk for a second briefly. Who is Ike Pearlmutter? Ike Pearlmutter is an executive that had been with Marvel Entertainment, formerly Marvel Comics, since the 90s. It's been around quite some time. He stayed on all the way through the Disney acquisition of Marvel Studios in 2009, which included the comic books. And then about this point in 2015 and then later in 2018, he made his exit. But during that time, the story clearly states, and it's true, I had forgotten about this, that in fact, at one point, because of the disagreement and because Disney saw that Feige, not Ike Pearlmutter, was the financial driving force of the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which at the time was really starting to take off for Disney and make them a ton of money. They recognized right away that even though Feige was Pearlmutter's subsidiary, or his subordinate, they were basically going to put Feige in charge without immediately removing Ike Pearlmutter. By having Feige go right around Ike Pearlmutter and report directly to the top. What does this sound like to you? Sounds a lot like the stories that we've heard for quite some time regarding the rumors that Jon Favreau was able to just walk right around Kennedy, that Kennedy was kind of pulled out of the loop when it came to Favreau properties, when it came to The Mandalorian, when it came to the spin-off shows like Ahsoka, the Obi-Wan show, basically the successful Star Wars properties that were really churning out the revenues for Disney. So it lends a lot of credence to those rumors that we have continued to hear about because Disney has a clear track record of doing this when it makes sense. It made sense in the case of Kevin Feige, and it absolutely made sense in the case of Jon Favreau. Kennedy's Star Wars was not producing them the kind of returns that they had expected. Jon Favreau's Star Wars clearly has been. Game, set, match. Well, let's go on. Pearlmutter also had actively opposed efforts to develop films like Captain Marvel and Black Widow centered on female superheroes. Now, that's a little bit of hearsay, but again, this is one of those things to where they had already put the trust in Feige's hands. While Feige's attorneys declined to comment, former Hollywood Reporter-editor Matthew Belloni, in his Thursday newsletter, quote, "What I'm hearing," said the Marvel boss wasn't happy about the situation and had lobbied Disney against putting the film, Black Widow, on Disney Plus. the same day as in theaters and not, quote, wanting to upset his talent. History has proven don't F with Kevin Feige, the second entertainment executive said. He wins every time. There's nothing like Marvel. Well, I would put it to you that yes, there is, and it's now Favreau Star Wars. And again, if Disney has a history of correcting things without firing executives by letting subordinates who are being more successful with the IPs go straight around them and report to the top, whereas their budgets are coming from the top, their financial direction is coming from the top, all the command and control is coming directly from above, either in this case from Alan Horn or from, at the time, Bob Iger himself. So here we are. And, just like Kathleen Kennedy, Ike Perlmutter was a guy who had a long, multi-year contract. It was not easy just to go, well, let's get rid of him now and put Feige in charge. They had to wait till that contract expired, or they had good legal cause to do so. Just because it's not being as successful as it's hoped is not grounds to breach the contract. And we're seeing that now with Kennedy as well. We'll get to that in just a second. So when we look at this story, we see a lot of parallels, and we're going to get to how this relates to Star Trek as well, because there's some key differences. While there's a lot of similarities here between what's happened over the years at Marvel Studios and how Kevin Feige has taken the position he has with where I think Favreau is going with Lucasfilm, there isn't yet quite that comparison over at Viacom CBS with Alex Kurtzman. And this is the big difference. Let's look at what happened. How did we go? How did Feige go from where he is, or where he was rather, to where he is now? Again, Feige was proving his success. He was proving that his ideas worked, his ideas were making Disney lots of money, and a change was made. And as I say with Disney, it's usually very quiet under cover of darkness. It's not like Disney really came out and made a big announcement about this. It just happened quietly behind the scenes. And then a few years later, Ike Perlmutter was retired, and then we kind of found out what had happened the years earlier, and here we are. Same thing at Lucasfilm. Kathy Kennedy had a contract that ran up at first through 2015 and then again through 2018, 3-year extensions, right? And everybody said, I can't believe Kathy Kennedy got renewed in 2018. Kind of feeling like that's exactly where Star Trek is right now in 2021. In other words, Star Trek 2021 is Star Wars 2018. The fan base is shattered. The fan base is divided. There are some new fans that have been brought in by the Kurtzman Trek, but there's a lot of the original fans, if not most or all of them, have been driven out. And there's a convincing right now going on between Alex Kurtzman and Viacom CBS that his way forward is still the best way to go, and that this is as good as it gets, right? Because they haven't had a seminal moment yet. What was the seminal moment for Disney that made Bob Iger shift gears after that point and start changing the leadership behind the scenes, even though the names like Kathy Kennedy still hung around because of her contract? Well, in 2018, when she was renewed in October, we had just come off 2 disastrous Star Wars movies. The Last Jedi, which basically broke the fan base in half, or worse than in half. And then it followed up with Solo, which bombed and lost money at the box office, largely due to fans punishing Disney for the temerity of doing what they did to Luke Skywalker. Now, at the time, when her contract came up in October of 2018, Disney had 2 choices: renew her or let her go and put somebody else in place. Ostensibly, I would believe at that point, Disney really didn't know who to put in that place, and they were still in the middle of the Star Wars sequel trilogy. And they probably felt at that point that Kathy Kennedy going forward was still their best bet. So she was renewed for another 3 years because Disney felt like maybe they didn't know what else to do. And of course, we had the famous comments from Bob Iger that we put out too much Star Wars too quickly. But of course, that wasn't Disney's original intention. Their original intention was to put out major Star Wars properties every single year. But when Kennedy broke it, they found themselves in a pickle. I think Viacom CBS is floating somewhere around that same point right now. But what then happened? What changed it? Well, the following year in 2019, we got the launch of Disney+. And with the launch of Disney+ came The Mandalorian, the show that launched Disney+ itself. And without The Mandalorian, we never would have seen the changes that we're getting now, because that was the first of the seminal moments for Disney that they realized, good Lord, there is a lot more money to be made out there with these Star Wars fans. They're not dead and gone. Now, in particular, that first episode of The Mandalorian, when that little baby Yoda Grogu's ears popped up out of the bassinet and those eyes popped into view on the camera, and that finger came out and met Pedro Pascal's for that final shot, that was it. The demand for merchandising went through the roof. The love of The Mandalorian was almost universal. And in the following year, we got the return of Luke Skywalker in grand fashion, the real Luke Skywalker. All of a sudden, Disney noticed that merchandising sales for this new Favreau-type property and classic Star Wars went through the roof. They saw sales that they never saw with sequel trilogy, Kennedyverse-based toys and merchandise. You see, Disney and Lucasfilm had that seminal moment where the light went off, showing them that, yes, we can do better. Yes, there is something out there that we can make a lot more money with. You see, Viacom CBS hasn't had that seminal moment yet. All we've had for the last few years is Kurtzman Trek, and they believe that maybe this is the best it's going to get. And it may come a point when somebody else steps in there and actually makes a really good quality Star Trek property that respects the original franchises and brings not only new fans in, but all the old fans that they've lost as well. And they see merchandising sales go up. They see interests go up. They see viewership go up. See, right now they don't have anything else to really compare to. It's been so long since good Star Trek was produced. They just think, maybe it's kind of worn out. And the fact of the matter is, it's about the best thing and only thing they really have driving any kind of viewership right now and subscribership on Paramount Plus, which is their streaming service still struggling to get off the ground. So you see, there's things we have to take into account. And this is why I believe that Star Trek right now, in 2021, is where Star Wars was in 2018. The tides right now are turning at Lucasfilm, but there's been nothing as of yet to have that same effect at Paramount with Star Trek. Hopefully, with time, we'll see some changes. But for now, we've got what we've got. Thanks again for being here. Make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave a comment below. Most importantly, I want to get your thoughts on this so we can have a discussion about it. And until next time, take care.